So today is like our last official meeting. We don't really have a lab today. Without getting authorization from the cloud company, I don't think it's legal for us to perform any attack. I'll look into the future lab on for this class again, maybe setting up a Docker on a local system and then be able to do that. But so today we're going to talk about cloud attacks. If you want to download the notes and the assignments, we'll go through that. I'll have the final review video up hopefully by tomorrow. And then I will have the fix for the wireless lab also this weekend. So I'll work through some of the, I worked through a couple of the problems. I just got to finalize a few things. So if you want to attempt it, if you have a spare wireless router and adapter, you can try that. If you need a Raspberry Pi to test things, I do have some spare Pi that I got from the makerspace. They also have some extra ones there, so you can always let me know and I can give you one. They're about $60, but I have the Pi 4 Plus, so 4B Plus. All right, so we're gonna go over the lecture for today. And then if you want to stick around to catch up with things, you can. So the last day to turn in late work, if you are turning in late work, most of you here right now don't have that requirement, but it will be the 26th of May. So if you have something that's outstanding, if it's locked, let me know. Okay. All right. So in cloud attacks, we're going to talk a little bit about the approach in cloud attack, the attack types, the vulnerabilities, a little bit on how to have preventative measures for cloud security. And we'll talk about some of the tools. I want to introduce you to some of the tools. I implemented a few tools for my Python class in the past, but there are new tools now that you can see. So cloud, as you know, is just a service that you acquire from another company. Usually you have the cloud giants like AWS, that's Amazon Web Service. Microsoft runs another company or a branch for cloud, that's Azure. So before we used to use what's called SharePoint, which is now migrated into Azure. And you might see Google Cloud and other areas. But there are local companies that have data center that offer cloud services. Cloud is somewhat fairly new for the industry to manage as far as security. We are fleshing out some of the issues with cloud, and we'll talk about some of the challenges in cloud security. There's still a lot of R&D in this area. So you often see that cloud attacks happens because we would see that a lot of the services now is being hosted through the cloud. So you would see services platforms for computational services, like I can run virtual machine instances from these remote servers. I can use cloud as an infrastructure, so I can host my database, my web applications, my storage, my network on somebody else's systems, right? So it depends on the tier and the type of service contract that you see with the organization, but it becomes a centralized area for a lot of the attacker. So instead of, trying to get through the network and looking into the infrastructure of an enterprise, now you see that, they would then target AWS hosted services for that organization, or Cloudflare, or, there are different companies that does that. So it might be an area that would be a little bit more centralized in the services. And we would see that with web and application and storage. So a lot of the times, this is a lot easier for the attacker as they target this. So they can exfiltrate data in more of like in one area versus going into multiple systems in different areas. So physically, you know, you would see that we can, and logically you would see that cloud often is being targeted. And the result of the attack is simple. It's really like any form of other type of attack. Exfiltrate data. So you're gonna have data breaches. You might have data corruption, so that will cause data loss. Just like any other server system being targeted, you are gonna have a denial of service attack and other type of attacks. Also, SQL injection and other areas. So unauthorized access is common. Usually that's through account management for the cloud, sometimes can be lacking. And that will get into exposing sensitive information or disrupting services. So if I'm targeting a web application or that is hosted by a certain company, right? I'm still gonna have to go through the process of attacking that particular application. So footprinting that particular system, trying to do recon, and then eventually maybe brute forcing the account to be able to have access. Come on in. Hello? Hi. Are you looking for me?
Yes, but I didn't know you were in the middle of class.
Yeah, I start class at 5. Did you need my help with something?
I was just asking a project or a question about the project.
If you want to hang around a little bit, you're welcome to sit in the room. I'm just doing a short lecture with them. They have a light session today.
Okay.
So if you want, you can hang around in the room. If you don't want to sit outside.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right. So we talked about the results. Now, in the next question, it asks you about the common type of attack. So in the past, we talked about the distributed denial of service. And hi. That is often done compared to denial of service because it's a lot easier to use multiple source to attack from, and then targeting that one particular entity or that one particular system. So you're gonna have DOS and DDoS. There's also account hijacking. So that means that they will need to access a certain type of account that has administrative privilege in order to get into certain part of the file system, right? A lot of times you would see cloud administrator account that is being privileged to access different area or developers. So if they use SaaS or SaaS, software as a service, sometimes you have higher level development access. So account hijacking is also common. And then with that, you would see user account compromise. You do see a little bit of escalation of privileges. So they might come in as one account and then be able to elevate their privilege to a different type or a different tier of that account. And anytime that you have user account compromise, you would often see that you have malware manipulation with that, right? They might install a Trojan, get somebody, phish somebody, or get somebody to log into their account, reset a password, be able to obtain that. So in the past, we talked about different forms of attacks there. So, but in the cloud, they can also perform malware injection, and this is simply just malicious code that's added to a certain system, or if it is for development. So if you're looking at like function as a service, they might inject some kind of malicious code there to be able to execute subtasks. I think the note talks about that. Okay. And then there's side channel attacks, cookie poisoning. Crypto mining, hello, is big because crypto mining is now heavily used to be able to access what transactional records for cryptocurrency, right? So you do see some of that in the cloud-based attack. And then, you know, so in various part, before a lot of people would have crypto mining farm, right? And then now it becomes illegal because, you know, a lot of companies are trying to secure their system against that. Then you have exploitation for the 0-day attack. That's just playing on the vulnerability, and then SQL injection. So there are also form of IoT attack that's integrated with the cloud. So it really depends on the type of service that you're using for your cloud, right? But these are the common attack types that you see. So you can find that information on the first page of our notes. So one of the things I want to focus on is we're going to talk a little bit about some of the attacks that we haven't talked about before, right? Like side channel attack. So this is just an exploitation of a leak that's in the physical system through the logical interface. So ultimately, they want to be able to obtain data, okay? And so they would perform it by just using a fake virtual machine or a malicious virtual machine. And this is a way that we can use it. Why do they use virtual machine? Because most of the cloud services are often being used as instances with VM, right? It doesn't matter what product. So for example, I want to host a server in my cloud. I obtain access to the cloud. I would then create an instance. I know in some other classes I demoed this, or I tried to show you guys that before, where you can create a virtual machine and run all the services on that virtual machine. So the attacker can do the same thing where concurrently, right, side channel, hence we would have a virtual machine that would then be placed in that physical host. That means that the server system that's hosting our virtual machine. So as you know, copying virtual machines and adding virtual machine is really simple. We just have to have a directory, a folder. We might just use an OVA. We can create that virtual machine instance and add it to that physical host. So as long as they can find where you're hosted and your host name and the address of your host, right? Side channel attack can be possible. So with that, they will be able to screen your targeted system and be able to perform other type of attack to obtain your data. So this is a little bit different than what you normally see, where we would logically attack and then be able to target that host. So they simply place a virtual machine on your physical host and be able to do that. Now, all physical hosts have some kind of MAC address, right, at that data center for, let's say, Amazon or Microsoft and so on. And so in order to find that information, they just need to be able to footprint, right, that particular system, that physical target in that data center. Another form of attack that I want to talk about, we've already talked about cookie poisoning when we talked about like web attack, right? We know that cookie contains a lot of important information. From a user perspective, cookie contains your preferences, your browsing history, right? Any kind of personalization that you're doing through the browser, so for web activity. But cookie also contain credentials, right? And data that pertains to that credential. So the attacker, the way that they want to use this is they want to, number one, see what kind of cookies you have. Number two, if they want to poison the cookie, if the cookie is targeted for cloud-based type of application or software as a service here, right? It is a way for them to access that particular web application. Because web applications is hosted through the cloud, right? Cookie poisoning simply can redirect the user, but it also can be a way that they can access that web application. So that leading us to the next few questions. Number 3, how do attackers perform side channel attack for the cloud platform? What are the goals of the side channel attack, right? You can take that section and add that to number 3. but I just simply summarize it. So by placing malicious virtual machine on the legitimate physical host used by the cloud customer, this will allow the attacker to access confidential information on the victim's machine. And when I place it onto the same host, because your host is your physical system, right? I can find a way for my virtual machine to be able to connect to the other instances that is hosted on that physical system. So let's say that they're running Linux server on that host, and I would place another Linux VM onto that same host. I just need to establish the internal network connection from virtual machine to virtual machine at this point. So then I would logically connect these two systems together and be able to see, right? But in order to identify the host, they need to find its public address to come in and also the MAC address to pinpoint the actual host in the data center. The goal of this type of attack is to ultimately extract data. And the data, your payloads would also contain passwords, right? Encryption keys, or it could be specific information depending on the target. So if I am targeting healthcare systems, right? I would then be able to extract personal identifiable health information, or if I'm targeting financial company, then that might be financial. So it really depends. So the sensitive data can be a larger scope that you're looking at, but ultimately they're looking for sensitive data that they can sell. So 90% of the cloud attack is really for financial gains, and 90% of it is going to be for data exfiltration. And then, you know, if they want to perform any kind of denial of service, that's just going to disrupt the services for your systems, or manipulate. So in order to manipulate the behavior of your system, they need to change the configuration of your system. And in order to do that, they need to access the system, right? And then for the next part, it asks about why are cookies targeted in cloud application attacks? It's because we mentioned that cookie contain users' credential, and your users would be, you know, your IT administrators, your cloud administrators, your security administrators. And then sometime also their preferences, their personalization for certain systems on the cloud. So cookies would be a way for us to have specific experience on the system through browsing or activity or application. So in an application, you notice if you modify things for the application, if you can, right? Sometimes the user can do that. It really, the web application, it would store that information onto the cookie. Like, for example, I would modify the way that I log in, right? You know how you can turn that notch to biometrics instead of, or you want to use multi-factor, or you want to receive notification whenever, you know, certain things happen to the app. For example, if it's a banking app, right? A big chunk of that data goes into your cookie, and in order to obtain sensitive information about that particular user, they would target the cookie. It can also be a way for them to track the user activity. So if they're monitoring a certain type of user, then that would be a way to do that. Okay, so, but ultimately we see that cookie poisoning is, or cookies can be used for access. Any question with this?
Yeah, I'm a little behind, but that's okay. I want to take a picture of it.
Yeah, I'll have the recorded video up later. Either this evening or tomorrow. So traditionally, we see that malware is being used for other things. But a big portion of it is to use to fish out information, right? Your credential mostly. So for the crypto mining attack, the way that they would gain a login credential is through malware. The popular one, the type that you see is often Trojan, right? Trojan masquerade itself into something that looks benign, and then, you know, that could be a keylogger that you often see, or a link, a malicious link that would, and they would be able to put up like a server where it looks like some kind of login to maybe your cloud application, and that's how they're able to obtain credential. We done a couple phishing labs, so you saw how we can have a template that looks like Instagram, and the user will type that in, but ultimately it is not Instagram. And whatever that you input your password, that will be sent to a different server, and that's how they're able to obtain credentials. So malware, you know, you often see implemented with other form of attack, and a lot of the times it's being used for credential purposes. So some of the cases that you've seen with the crypto hack, right, in the last couple of years, you often see that it's also has this component. Most of the cloud attack that you see or you read about, you would also see, right? Circumventing credential or login is the initial part of it. Any question? And you can find all of this information on the notes, right? You can summarize it, but now for crypto mining, there is transactional and validation process for the blockchain, right? A lot of the servers that are doing that is hosted by Amazon because convenient, cheap, very affordable for a lot of the company that's you know, offering cryptocurrency. So what you see is, you know, you do see some aspect that they are targeting specifically certain cloud service provider because they host crypto-based systems. Question? So crypto mining attack is on page 2. Then it goes into zero-day exploits. We talked about zero-day exploits before, just a flaw in software development, right? Since the day that we go live, it's already there. So if it hasn't been patched. So similar to all the other systems, we want to make sure that our cloud systems have patch that when it needs, because the patch closed out the security gap. I think we spent a whole unit on SQL injection. You did a little bit of DBWA injection. So injection is really, the intention is to be able to obtain data from databases, right? You see some example, a lot of the time injection really targets SQL, SQL. And the majority of the database use relational data, the relational database where we have table, right? And then we would use column to be able to relate it to another table. But there are some newer cases that you see that they are using NoSQL attack. So because companies have transitioned to like MongoDB or NoSQL. So this is a way that they would be able to obtain data or expose sensitive data. Just side note, have you guys seen the Ashley, what is it? Anderson or Madison something?
Madison.
Ashley, yeah, Ashley Madison documentary on Netflix. I started watching it a couple episodes in, you know, and now it's gotten to the point where the attack's starting to happen, right? So they go into how the breach and you know, how they hired like one of the top-notch security expert for that from Norway, and he was not able to contain the breach. So, but if you have time, you know, sometime in the summer or later on, watch it. It's really interesting.
They made a show about
It's-
they made a show about the site being hacked.
Yeah. Well, the site itself and then the process on how they were taken down. Yeah. It's on Netflix. Mhm. All right. So here, it goes a little bit into SQL injection, elevating the privilege in the system. A lot of times they SQL inject to obtain username and password also. So, you know, the important part of database protection is what? Number one, we need to have input validation, right? And that sometime go back to development and redesign of the database. Number two, we want to make sure that we control permissions and access privilege to the database. So you can, you know, do read and write type of permissions for the fields or the columns that is, you know, that contain sensitive data. So controlling the permission for those areas instead of just, you know, the general permission for the entire table or the entire database, you need to focus on specific element of that of that database and controlling the permission for that. Okay. Okay, so the flaw we would see as vulnerabilities, one of the areas is misconfiguration of your system, your cloud system. So we always start with least privilege principle, making sure that that is being incorporated as part of our security practices for cloud infrastructure. Give the user what they only need, right? No more or less. Remove the default administrator privilege or access. Create specific accounts for development and administration of the cloud, very important. Because they're gonna target specific default user. Like your cloud administrator. So security practices for access management is a must, and all your, most of your cloud service provider is gonna use the mechanism called IAM. We talked about that before, right, for identity access management. This is where you can control who has access to your cloud service. You can create the user account and give them the appropriate privilege that they need. Right, so if you have people who are monitoring, they should not be modifying things on your cloud platform. So really mapping out the role base and looking at the responsibility for cloud management is very important. Patch your system and applications, so firmware and software updates a must. Right, firmware, particularly with IoT. So if you're running IoT with cloud, but firmware also integrated with other things, but yeah, that's a must. remove default settings in system and applications, configure security settings in systems, and apply security design in application development. That can be a challenge because if you're looking at DevOps, right? Now we are using different model to make sure that we're pushing out application as fast as possible and you know, integrating all the features that the user need. But at the same time, you have to be mindful of how secure those features and components would be on the applications. So it needs to be sec DevOps, okay? That's where we should operate. So that was one of the challenges for IT to keep up with development and for development to agree with IT to make sure that security elements is incorporated. Because sometimes when you enable certain services on the app, you have to reduce the security and you increase the risk in the security for that app. So regularly assess your app and its flaws and then be able to close out the gaps is important. Any question? Okay, so vulnerability starts on page 3. And then the second section of this, it goes into APIs, right? APIs, we know that it is application program interface. This is a way that we can have a program connecting to another program. So for example, I can have, you know, my security tool using it as an API on top of my regular application for my system management. So there's a thing called shadow APIs, and this comes up whenever that you search for cloud security. It is because if it's not authorized or properly documented, the APIs would then, you know, can be utilized in the wrong way or expose sensitive data, right? So, and then also in development, we need to address API parameters, because that can be injected with code to be able to pull out, because parameter is used for what? For data, right? So if you're looking at like function parameter, it is just a placeholder where we would be able to output some kind of data, right? So that could be a variable, or it could be a container. So they can inject the code in order to retrieve or pull data. So it's important that we need to validate and sanitize. Okay. This is part of code analysis. So if you're doing like manual or automatic code analysis, you need to make sure that you validate and sanitize your code. Let me move 6 down so we can see the next few questions. Okay, so for 7, it says in cloud attacks, how do unsecured APIs become exploited? What are the results of these exploitations? It can be exploited by attacker gaining unauthorized access to the system or data to disrupt operations of the API. So if they cannot find data through the API, they can cause the API to malfunction, which means that, you know, that could impact your operations, right? So we see a lot of things that are integrated with artificial intelligence these days, right? So for example, I go to YouTube. I'm trying to find certain type of video by putting in the criteria in the search. YouTube, Google integrated artificial intelligence in helping me, right, with my search result. you see AI integrated in a lot of other things. And the way that it's integrated is through API. So a lot of your web activity on all the applications that you see now has generative API integrated for artificial intelligence. That means that it opens up an area that we see in security that is now being exploited. Right? Because the API needs to access the core of the program to be able to retrieve some kind of data. Because you're asking it to pull data, right? So what you see is you have to really think about how that can be implemented in a secured way. So I just heard on the radio on the way in that they're using generative AI to publish news these days, right? To be able to give you the article, before we would say fake news, but not necessarily fake news. It uses real content, but be able to give you different variations of articles and videos and feed on your social media through generative AI. Okay, so different integration of things that we have to think about. And from an aspect of security, we always question the mechanism on how API is integrated with the application itself. Then by exploiting the shadow API, the attacker can obtain, right, the functionality of the application. Number one, they can attack that or modify that, or the data that's being utilized in that application. So if you're looking at financial application, banking, credit card transactions, or even things that we deal with health or government related, like DMV apps, right? And by exploiting the parameters, the attacker can perform malicious code injection to obtain application access and data access. So before we go into the example, on page 4, it talk about microservice. And this is fairly new for the area that we see for cloud security. And so this is a development approach that you would see instead of having, more of the complex functions created for the application. They break it down into more of like the smaller functions, which is what we see with microservices. And sometimes they would name it as monolithic type of applications. So that way it is manageable and it scales. Okay, so let's think about that, right? When we look at web applications, we would see that there are different web applications for different functionality. And it is manageable because you might want to do away with certain feature in your application. So with that, what we would see is that we would then have to manage them as individual components. And that means that the workload for the applications become more of an attack surface, because then that could expose the entire core of the application if the attack happens, right? Not many cases that you see now for the microservices, because this is still pretty new for the development side of the house, but you do see, they do some research in the attack surface on the cloud, and they do find some microservices being compromised. Okay, so let's answer that question. So it asks you, why is microservices management needed for cloud platform security? Because unmanaged microservices can expose workload, which becomes the attack surface. It really is So if we don't manage it, we don't know what could be attacked, right? So that means that we have to really monitor and making sure that we have some expectation in the attack surface, so that way we can protect it, right? And then I gave you guys some example of some worldwide type, and I got some information from the feed, and I looked into some additional articles for this. But in 2021, all of these cases happened in 2021. That was not too long ago, a few years ago. So Cassia is a service provider that is cloud-based. So in that case, they were able to gain administrative control through the services using ransomware. Ransomware is a very popular tool these days for a lot of the type of attack. So that means that they lock everything down, ask for some ransom or some kind of compensation. And that impacted their customers, their clients. During that attack, they took down software as a service servers. So because Cassia has hosted a lot of the applications for, like web-based application on their cloud system. And they also impact stored attached network appliances, that's known as their VSA or their virtual SAN, that is. So across 10 countries, because they are service providers for those clients in different country, it caused disruption for those people. Because on the virtual SAN, that's where your data sits, right? And so Cassia took 4 days to respond and be able to contain that, recover from that attack, I should say. And then their comeback was, oh, well, we'll now offer you the VSA detection type of tool so that way you can analyze your services. Remember that cloud, they're not responsible for your security, right? That's based on the contract. The majority of the time, it's 100% on the customer. So if the client doesn't protect their own system, right? So what they're saying is, oh, here's the tool. You can use this tool to analyze and determine the weaknesses of your system, and you can do some form of protection or countermeasure or security measure with that. We're not going to be 100% responsible for any kind of attack on your hosted system.
Mm.
And that's common, right? That's what cloud service is. You just borrowing. So let's take this into our daily life perspective. You rent a storage location to put all your important personal belongings there. You have an option to lock the door or not lock it, right? If you don't lock it, your stuff might be gone the next day or the next hour. Who knows? Depends on the area, right? Same thing with cloud. You just renting someone else's server, right? Somewhere else, put your stuff on there. You can secure it. You don't have to secure it. If you don't, that's your loss, right? So if your contract requires that they monitor it 100%, yes, they're gonna protect their physical system, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to, right? It depends on the contract. So a lot of people think that, when you lease the cloud, they're gonna do everything for you. No, that's not true.
Monitoring people's setup.
Well, they're just gonna protect their hardware though, right? Yeah, they're gonna have some security measure to protect their data center. But if you are being targeted, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna protect you, right? So because we learned through this class that attack can come in many different flavors. So they don't necessarily target the server, they might target an element of like certain part of it, and you don't know, so, it's just shift the liability to other areas, right? So this is why a lot of people who buy cloud buy cybersecurity insurance, and the insurance company can reject you. It really depends on what do you have. So when you buy the insurance, it's like they're asking you, are you wearing a seatbelt when you drive? Right? So it's the same question that it's being asked is who, how do you protect your system so that way we can insure you? Because they're not gonna lose money. And, they always increase the price, right? I've known people that got turned down for cybersecurity insurance, even if they're willing to pay, right? And you see that with car insurance is the same thing. So in the example, I also provided the Facebook, and you can read your recommended textbook for additional example, but those are more general example. There are tons of example online that you can read that's really interesting, right? Facebook cloud attack, the main point behind that was to leak data. And there was millions of users that was leaked. And it was exposed through databases. So you're gonna see a trend in a lot of these cloud attacks is to really exfiltrate data, and where does the data sit? In storage and databases. Because data is asset, it's money. And then there is Verizon attack. I think I didn't include it in the questions, but you can read about that. I think that happened in 2017. It happened to them again in 2019 with a bigger breach. Verizon is doing a good job now, right? Upping their game in security. So they're doing a lot of R&D in that area because it's such a huge communication company. But everybody is at risk. No one's not on that list, right? So Cognite, cloud attack, the exploitation again is database. And simply they didn't have any authentication for the database server. Just imagine that you have no login, right? Open Sesame, 5 billion records of the users were made public. And this is in 2021. So if this happens in 2001, I would not question the database administrator about not having authentication. Like, what were you thinking? Not having any form of authentication to control your database security. But this is in 2021, 5 billion. So one swoop, you're able to get everything, right? I don't even have to inject anything. I don't even have to, anonymous login, right? Could be a default login if they have any form of authentication. So they didn't have any kind of privilege control or access management in that area, right? It's also, you have to think about like, where does this, the data warehouse is stored, right? Like some country and the requirement for, protection in your data is a little bit different in different part of the world, right? So in North America, that will be different than Europe or Asia and so on. So now we're questioning TikTok, same thing, right? About how they protect our data in China or even in different part of the world. Because, once you give them that data, the ownership is now shared. It's no longer your data because they house your data. So how do they protect that, right? So that's why we're trying to push for regulations to make sure that the company provides services to the North American users have some form of requirement, right? But look, they're saying that the data is not housed in the United States. So there's still some gray area we have to flesh out about, like, so that's why they're dissuading people from using TikTok in America because, and a lot of the other apps that you see, right? So we truly don't have a way to control some part of that in different part of the world. So as a user, you have a choice to not use or use, right? Turn it off or turn it on.
How does VPN work, in other countries? You could use your place of VPN to actually access.
Yeah,
stuff in other
It,
countries,
it
right?
does shield who can see you. But ultimately, you're still accessing a thing that contains your data.
Yeah.
So if you're using VPN to access TikTok and give TikTok a lot of your sensitive information, right? Then your data is still being at risk. It's just your network traffic is being shielded. It's kind of like, you know, how you're protecting your car, but the destination where your car is heading could be at risk, so you're still gonna be at risk either way. Okay, and then the Raychat case, the Raychat case is a unique one that this is a newer approach in no relational database. It is a NoSQL database attack and it is a misconfiguration on MongoDB. MongoDB is very popular. NoSQL is used in a lot of your social media company, including Meta or Facebook. Google use some non-relational database. You see a lot of that now. It's very popular. And you still see some traditional relational database as well. So it doesn't hurt. If you want to get into this area for security, right? Know the product. It's all about product knowledge in our field, right? To really understand its core and how it works is to understand how it's created. So to break or make the security is understand how it works, how it's coded, how it's created. And when you're encrypting data, you need to think about encrypting your data at rest, where your data is stored, like on a drive, right? On SAN, like we talked about that earlier, storage attached, right? To your network, or network attached storage, or your storage that is placed on a server somewhere, or your file server, we used to call that. Now I think Microsoft named it storage server or something. So your container, your drives, encrypting data at rest, encrypting data in transit, in email, in the web, right? So web traffic encryption is so important. Right now, we're still relying on symmetric key base, right? For exchanging key, and then also stream-based type of web encryption, which is through TLS. And so when you watch the documentary, right, if you happen to do that, it talks about SSL, right? It talks about how denial of service attack happened. You see all of the technical components from our view in security. And then your data in use, data that's being modified, saved, rewrite, pertinently. So, and each of those areas have different, you should implement different type of encryption. It will require you to, right? So encryption is important. But encrypting is just to slow down the attack, right? Or the exposure of sensitive data. Nothing we do is 100%. So if you're encrypting and you're not securing your keys, then no point. Sorry, I misspelled the cloud here. Should be D. So what are some of the preventative measures? Data encryption, we mentioned that in the last question. You need to manage access, and I can't emphasize this enough, right? For your system, your services, your data, your applications, and your API. All of those areas are a must. There's a new management feature that you see with cloud, and this is integrated in different service providers from Microsoft to AWS to, you know, you see it. It's known as cloud security management or posture management. This is kind of like your SIEM in the cloud, right? This is a way that we can detect, monitor threats. And we can set rules in based on the behavior of our threats. So very similar to what you see in IPS and other elements. So this is a software tool that can be, it is integrated with your service, or your cloud service package. You can automate response to threats. And you would manage cloud assets. So your cloud assets can be virtual machine instances. It could be containers like Kubernetes. It could be a lot of different things, right? Elements into the cloud that you use. So your assets can be managed. So basically it looks at the inventory of your cloud and then be able to give you the status of those assets. And then that way you can look at your threat trend and do the analysis and mitigate your threat. And we need to customize it. It's not a thing where you can just set and forget. It's one of those things that you have to continue to do. And this is where the fall down for cloud security, right? It is harder to tackle for us because you don't have one cloud solution that's exactly the same as the next for the next company. So this is a challenge for you guys, right? When you go into the field and when you have to assess cloud, which most people have, one company compared to the next company, you might have a very small similarity in what they use, even though you're looking at, oh, infrastructure as a service and infrastructure as a service, you do see that like the company operation needs are a little bit different. So you can't just have like a one set play for all of the cloud solution, and this is a challenge for us. Right, it's such a variety of different things. You know, just like how we see a network is not always the same from one company to the next, right? So. And so with that said, we would see the challenges for cloud security. So the fall down is, I think, a lot of the knowledge is still lacking in administration. People who manage cloud are traditional people who manage network and infrastructure. So taking that knowledge and apply to cloud is not parallel. It's not the same. Different technology, different integration. You know, even the interface itself is different. So making sure that your internal people have the skill sets to do that. So if you want to excel in the security area, know more about cloud, right? Know more about AWS, know more about Azure, know more about Kubernetes, know more about cloud technology in general, because this is where we operate now. And I think, you know, people from my generation were so traditional about network administration, system administration. It's not the same. Different animal. Effectively use IAM, Identity Access Management, and Privilege Access Management, PAM. When you first log into your console, your dashboard, it shows that tab. And if you don't know what to do, it has instruction for you what to do, right? It has, and then there are tutorials, sometimes video integrated. I know Azure has some of that component built within some of their pages. So they want to make sure that you have access management. It's just the fall down is how we're mapping the responsibility and the control is important. One thing that I want to mention is to make sure that you rotate privilege in the cloud. And we talk about separation of duty. We don't give it to one person. We want to have multiple people being in charge of that. But you need to rotate it through your team. Not just two people, the whole team. Right? So the shared responsibility is going to force people to understand how to do it better. And as a team, you collaborate in making sure that their privilege account is controlled properly. And there's no fraudulent, right? Some of the cloud leak that's caused by like people who have the privilege. But I think the Verizon leak was that it's two developer that contracted with Verizon, but they developed that directly with AWS. Those accounts were the one that caused the compromise. We want to reduce shadow IT and align IT operations with SecDevOps, security development operations. And you want to manage your system and user access to fulfill compliance requirements, because ultimately, right, we are going to get audited based on the industry that we're in, whether we're FISMA, FERPA, SOX, PCI, DSS, all of those things depending on the industry, but we want to make sure. So I think the bigger picture, security is really boiling down to only a few things, right? And access management is one of the primary things that you have to look at, no matter what area it is, whether it's cloud, it's IoT, or it's web applications, it's your server. We have to be very good at controlling access. Okay, so I want you to kind of read some of the things, and you can read other articles. This was one of the case that they talk about this. This is April 1704. So you visit the website. It's always good to keep up with technology and understand some of the newer things that are happening. So here, this is a case on open metadata. So I want you to read the article. You can also click on the CVE, which gives you the common vulnerability information. How it happens, and it happens in the Kubernetes environment. So that's your container. And, so it's a very short article. So go through it, answer the questions. And ultimately, there's only one fix in this area, right? If you go through the article, you quickly see it. From a security person, you'll be like, oh, just fix that, and then it should take care of the vulnerability for future attacks. Okay. So read through the article. You need to answer these questions. I want you to learn a little bit about open metadata, what that is. And then how did they start exploiting the vulnerability? Think about access. How was the malware used in this? And look at the type of malware that they use. And for remote, how do they reverse shell and look at the vulnerability? So some of the things I want to point out, I know that we finished the questions here. So when I first posted the notes, I'm like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't include the tools, but what good is it if you don't know the type of tools that you can use for security, right? Pen testing cloud, if you create a lab environment, it is a little bit more challenging, but you can set up a test. I think I looked at it in Azure. You can do that, and the same thing with AWS. So you can set up the test environment. So let me go down to the tools section. Here are the tools. Okay. A lot of the tools that you're going to see is really aimed for AWS only because it is just more popular. Just like how you see that more malware is created for Windows, right? Because it's just more used. But you do see there are some options that are versatile, and it can also go for Azure or the other area. And then I included some of the additional resources for you too. A lot of these tools are used for black box testing, but you can also use, most of these tools are built for pen testing. They're built by pen tester for pen tester. Okay. So just like what you've seen with Netcat, right? We have a cloud container attack tool called CCAT. Okay. So it's going to look at the AWS, and this is really good for footprinting. PackU I used before. This again is for AWS, but it is a toolkit. So you have a little bit more. So if you are going to be on red team, you are going to do offensive security, right? That means that we're going to hack and trying to find the flaws, like for, pen testing. You can use PackU. This is something that's new. It is a library, and it's used for black box testing. I read a little bit about it. interesting name, right? But it really stands for AWS Attack Library for, you know, so it's weird out. Suite, I think I touched on this. Most of these are written in Python, which is nice. I think I talk about this in Python. It is API, it has the capability to do multiple cloud auditing. So if you are using different cloud platforms, you can use Scout Suite. And then there are others. So S3 Scanner is specifically for S3, and right now they have it for AWS only. You know that Azure also have S3. S3, we often use that for things like IoT devices or just communication message type of cloud-based system. So if you're looking at like your smart thermostat, it would use something like that. But companies can use it for other things like handheld devices and other area. This is a tool that you can go and find other tools, right, for privilege escalation from GitHub. And then I found additional ones for you, like Cloud Shadow admins. So if you want to find like the Cloud Shadow admins account, you can use SkyArk. If you want Azure type of tool, Road Tools is going to be good. It is a framework. So frameworks is always nice because it has other components with the tool. Instead of pulling multiple tools and other things together, you have the frameworks for that. And I think it uses never mind. And then you have Azure or PowerShell for exploitation of Azure. So there are Azure specific and there are AWS specific. You don't see other products type of tools because just these are just the common ones that you see, Azure and AWS. And then I put down some link for you. These don't necessarily are cloud tools. They're just tools in general for pen testing. So you can see like Overlord, Sliver, Gitbound. So you can click on it and find out. Okay. So sometimes it's browser based because if we're looking at like web applications and things, sometimes, you know, it's for other areas. So you can find resources for that.
The favorite one.
For cloud, I've only used a couple, right? In my experience, I've only tested like maybe a couple of the services. So I would be biased to say what would be my favorite, right? I haven't had a chance. So I've been exposed to PowerShell. I'm gonna tell you though, Microsoft Azure is a little bit more difficult to obtain, some information compared to AWS, but that's just my experience and it could be varied. I'm also fairly new to cloud assessment. My jam is, you know, as you see in your lab already, is web application assessment, but it's directly with web servers, right? Through the cloud, that's an additional hoops that you have to jump and set up directly into the network with the web server if they have their own data center or their own network system. It's just a lot easier. Traditionally, you know, I'm built for that, so I'm still wrapping my head around like how to get through some of the other areas, but yeah. And then so the security documentation is also important. It's supported by the community. And then some of these are just resources for you to go to, refer to, right? Sometimes they might have information or tutorials and recommendation for you. So it's always good to look at those things. So I try to give you a little bit of background in that. Okay, so what I'll do is for the final review, I'll wrap it up tonight. I'll have the video up hopefully by tomorrow. I'll try to record it tonight and then I'll push that up. So when you see the final review, just keep in mind that you don't have to submit it, use it as a study guide. So go through it by yourself first. And then if you're stuck on something, go back to your notes and your assignments and then also watch the video. My intention is to help you in case you get stuck with the questions, But a lot of this we already talked about in class, we've done it in class, so your final exam is gonna be 50 questions, multiple choice. It's easy, right? It covers all the concept that we cover in class. There will be a few questions that is lab related. I just want to make sure you know how to do along with you have the concept for the course. And if they don't get tests out for me in time, like by next week, I will write your own practice tests using a practice test. So I do have access as faculty level, and I have a customized practice test for this class. It's just, you know, it's seamless to be pushing out through tests out. So you can run it as many times and you can go back to it later. Let's say that if we get tests out at the end of the class, right? I'm still gonna give you access code, right? You might not be required to link it to through Canvas, but you should always access it. You have 18 months once you activate that code, so you can always go back. And if you want to do Pen Test Plus, email me. I have exam voucher for you, but do study. That is a little bit more expensive test and it is a little bit harder test. If you go for the ethical hacking one, they do allow you to use notes, but tremendously higher in price, right? In my opinion, if you're gonna be, you know, a first level incident responder, a security analyst, these certifications is gonna come in handy. It's gonna elevate you to the next level. You can work for consulting company, you can be your own consultant. You can do a lot of things with it, but certification doesn't hurt. It's kind of like you having an extra class in your driver license so you can able to operate different vehicle. It's just a way for you to tap into a different area and, you know, and negotiate your salary ultimately. But Disney is hiring, I mentioned $40 to $40 an hour, $45 an hour for internship for the fall. They're looking at for this upcoming fall. So if you look online, you can apply. Just know that Disney is a little bit more challenging to get into, but enterprise hire from Disney because Disney trains really well. And I do hope that you get the internship. If I could do anything to help you, like giving you a letter of recommendation, or, you know, be your reference, just send me an email. Don't like make it a surprise when I get a phone call and like so-and-so put you down for reference. And I'm trying to think like, oh, who was that way back when, right? But if you ask for a letter of recommendation, if it's been a while, send me your resume. Let me know what you've been up to. But make sure that you tap into the apprenticeship program because they have scholarship and stuff for you if you transfer, so. But let me pause and stop.